introduce yourself in the chat if you'd like. Tell us who you are, tell us where you're coming from, whatever you want to share with us. So this is our executive team, the amazing group that works year-round to put together amazing events and interesting programs for all of you throughout the year. And then, Rosalind, we can go to the next slide. I'm just going to be very quick because I want to jump right into our presenters and everything. But I'd also like to invite all of you to join our community, to join the CIHE community. You can register for to be a member of the community. You can also join us at our pre-conference that will take place the day before the actual ASHE conference, and then also stay for the ASHE conference. We'll be in Minnesota in November. We will also have many, many more programs coming up the rest of this year. One of the things that we try to do is have a monthly webinar such like this one, for all of you to join in, meet new folks, network a little bit, and then learn some great new things from colleagues all over the world and everything. We also have events specifically for graduate students, and so make sure you take a look at all of that when we send out a monthly newsletter that gives out a lot of information about things that are going on. So I told you I was going to be quick because we all want to hear from our speakers, so I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Rosalind.
Okay, oh, there it goes. Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to our webinar on unintended consequences of internationalization. I'd like to very briefly introduce our team that will be sharing wonderful information from the book today. Ayodeji Arogundade is the chair of the Business and Computer Science Division, Lewis Clark State College in Lewiston, Idaho. And I will let our speakers elaborate on the wonderful work that they have been doing. Hakan Ergin, who's an assistant professor of higher education studies, and Hakan, I'm not going to be able to pronounce the name of your university. I am so sorry. And Shahrazad, who's the co-editor of the book, who's not going to be able to be here because she just got appointed as member of the International Affairs Board of the City of San Diego, and she's actually in council meetings at this point. And I am Rosalind Raby. I am a senior lecturer at California State University, Northridge, and I am the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Comparative and International Higher Education. Sorry. The book that we are going to be sharing today is Unintended Consequences of Internationalization in Higher Education. This was one of the more exciting projects that I have worked on because when we started, we really didn't have a definition, we didn't have an idea, and it just took off as something that resonated with each of our authors. As you could see, we have chapters on a variety of countries, many of them from the Global South, and a lot of them from the MENA regions. We did this on purpose because we wanted to have voices from people who are not usually represented. As you see, you can order the book too. I'm sorry, there it goes. So, as I mentioned, there is no solid definition of unintended consequences in the literature that we found. So we created our own definition because what we found through doing the book is that there's uncertainty of outcomes, missteps in evaluation, and weak projections of goals if you don't know that unintended consequences exist. And so I'm going to unpack the definitions. I'm going to provide a framework that I think we can use to really have a more in-depth understanding, and then I will pass it on to our guest speakers. The definition we created was what occurs when a single or set of actions, theoretical or practical, influence new perceptions, trajectories of actions, or byproducts in unexpected ways. So if I'm going to break this down and make it a little less scholarly, most actions begin with intent and they end with outcomes. But unintended consequences shows that there's always actions past outcomes. Sometimes they're intended, sometimes they're not. We find that theoretically, unintended consequences frames goals and visions, and practically, it is the outcome of policies and products. So we did find a couple of definitions. The earliest definition we found was from a sociologist who says it's present everywhere in social life. I don't know what to do with something so broad like that. And Knight, in International Higher Education issue, says it exists. Both of those are pretty much acknowledging that there are unintended consequences, but not really telling us much more. In the political science world, Lucia and Matthias say there's an inescapable reality of international policies and politics. DeWitt talks about it as something that could bring opportunities. So that's one of the first acknowledgments that unintended consequences could be positive. However, pretty much everybody else talks about it as negative and something to avoid and links it to neoliberalism. As you'll see from our speakers today, it doesn't have to be that. So we created 5 pillars or for ideas for a framework. And we can see that we can unpack each one of these. Unintended consequences lead to new actions or opportunities. It leads to unforeseen actions that are not anticipated. It leads to results that are the opposite of intent. It leads to new spontaneous changes. And it forces actors to take calculated risks to reinforce, alter, or reverse what has happened. If we use an example 1, pillar 2, that national policies lead to unforeseen actions. We have 3 examples from 3 of the chapters in the book, talking about Canadian national policies, Lebanon attempt for research and collaboration with France, and in Tunisia, what happened when the intended collaborations did not go as expected, but it led to unforeseen adoption of a new curricular option. Pillar 3 talks about the opposite of intent. And a lot of the chapters in the book talked about the design to establish bilateral international collaborations with the global north. But the opposite of intent happened, that those collaborations didn't work out as planned. And instead, there were regional collaborations that were formed, and HEIs became the hub for their regional areas. The final pillar I'm going to unpack is the pillar 5 that talks about calculated risks that transform the original intent. And we could see this in terms of the designs as well to raise rankings, and then it transforms the original intent to something else. Digitalization as a result of COVID, and wonderful examples of how many of the institutions had extremely good responses to COVID and digitalization, and the investment into programs that then led unexpectedly to other outcomes. Oops, sorry about that. So the main points that we could talk about in a takeaway. There is a definition. We see unintended consequences as both a negative and a positive, and in many cases, they're both. You can have both a negative and a positive that occur simultaneously. The concept of supporting the public good was embedded in all of the chapters of the book. Public good to facilitate employability, to have the soft skills, etc. Southern theory and local imaginaries. Many of the chapters did talk about decolonialization as an unintended consequence to explain how the countries are marginalized and what came out of that. That, again, action, post-action. And local imaginaries show the strength in the case study countries that talk about local changes that are grounded in the countries themselves. So in conclusion, we look at unintended consequences as a tool that we could use to see how change unfolds over time. Change is not always linear. It is multidirectional. It could even reverse, which is part of the importance of unintended consequences. There are new ways of looking that leads to alternate ways of knowing. So thank you. And I'm going to now have Dr. Ayodeji, well, I'm sorry, I'm from Los Angeles. We're very informal. So please provide some context on Nigeria. Oh, you're muted.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for having me today. And I'm happy to be here. My name is Dr. Ayodeji Arogundade. I'm the chair of the Business and Computer Science Division at Lewis Clark State College, originally from Nigeria. And I've been to Nigeria a couple of times and to some other African countries. Angola, for example. I was in Congo. I was in Cote d'Ivoire. I was in Ghana, Nigeria to recruit students to the United States. And that is similar to what we're talking about today. Internationalization of higher education in Nigeria, unintended positive and negative consequences. I will start by going over what I will be presenting. I will start with the definition of concept. Rosalind has done a beautiful job defining everything you need to know about internationalization. Then I will go to the overview of internationalization of higher education institutions in Nigeria. I will look at some of the study questions and the theoretical framework before going to before talking on the positive or unintended consequences of internationalization in Nigeria. Then I will continue with the negative UCI in Nigeria before I conclude. Talking about the definition of concept, I put a map there. That is the map of the world, and you see Africa there, and you see Nigeria somewhere there. So what is internationalization of higher education? According to Knight, 1993, the process of integrating an international intercultural dimension into the teaching, research, and service functions of the institution. I say it, I try to break it down, and I say it is a process of adding values that have global appeal into higher education institutions. So I try to break the definition down. Okay, it's just adding values, but the values must have global appeal when it comes to higher education institutions. So I want to give a quick overview of internationalization of higher education institutions in Nigeria. I said the concept is not entirely new in higher education in Nigeria. The reason being that our education system is patterned after the design of the British system and can be said to be internationalized. Second, according to Vargas 2008, universities are institutions with both national and international characteristics. So the content and the knowledge imparted to students is universal and global, but the ownership and structure and organization have always been national. So it's not entirely new in Nigeria. But the race to further internationalize HEIS is becoming more intense among the over 835 institutions in Nigeria. A lot of more institutions are trying to outcompete each other in an attempt to internationalize their education programs. I mean, the reasons cannot be far-fetched because of the various benefits ascribed to internationalization. So many institutions are trying to integrate all the international strategies into their teaching, research, and functions just to outwit one another. Today, we hear various terminologies in Nigeria, 2+2, 3+2, research collaborations, joint and double degrees, split degrees, study abroad, student and faculty exchange programs, joint publication, and visiting lecturer. These are common terms now in Nigeria. So the race is becoming faster. Some institutions are internationalizing for various reasons. Some of these are some of the reasons why, especially in Nigeria: increased visibility. Every institution wants to be visible, recognized. They want international recognition. Increase enrollment opportunities, although that is not always the case. It's one-way direction. It's not always the case. Increased revenue generation. It's not always the case, especially as I will explain later. Improved ranking, yeah. Oh, they want higher ranking. Enhance international cooperation and capacity building. That is when we partner with foreign institutions. And because of competitive advantage over their colleagues, other universities in Nigeria. So the question I try to address with this is, number one, are there some UPC, that is unintended positive consequences of internationalization? Are there some unintended negative consequences? And how do we mitigate the unintended negative consequences of internationalization? Theoretical framework, because of time, I just said I will talk a little bit about this. The paper draws on the world society theory to view internationalization as one manifestation of a global cultural frame that affects education in diverse ways. So we see many developing countries are adopting wealthy and developed nations' educational and research system because they believe there's a direct causal pathway that leads from education and science to economic growth. And that is true because developed countries are doing very well, probably because of their education system. So developing countries want to adopt some of these systems. On the other hand, developing nations sometimes adopt world society policy and structures to gain national or world society legitimacy. So these are some reasons why they adopt these cultural, the education systems from the developed countries. Study methodology. Quickly, 2 different surveys were conducted. I've been to Nigeria because I was from Nigeria. So I was able to use random sampling for those in Nigeria. The second survey was conducted here for Nigerians in diaspora. I used convenient sampling because since it's difficult to locate where most Nigerians are in the United States, most especially because I reside in Idaho, in Lewiston, Idaho. So it's difficult to really navigate and get as much people as possible. Then I conducted personal interviews of professors in different geopolitical zones in Nigeria. I also compared survey findings with findings from other literature. So with this, I was able to come up with some findings. Some of the research findings are detailed findings. They are stated in the book, but I just brought just a few of them here for the purpose of this short presentation. How satisfied are you with the education system? We see that close to 80% of people that were asked said they were very unsatisfied. How do you agree with statements? I would rather choose to study outside in any institutions outside Nigeria's system. We see over 90% said yes, they are just willing to study anywhere except Nigeria. If you have the opportunity to travel out of Nigeria to study or for research collaborations, how likely are you going to come back? We see that more than 70% are not likely to come back. So even some of them are already, they are professors in Nigeria, they're already lecturing, but yet they don't want to come back. Then the next next question is, how likely are you going to come back? Going back to Nigeria to live. Now, we have this question for people that are already in diaspora, working outside the country. How likely are you going back to work in Nigeria? Overwhelming or 70-something% said no, they are not going back. So they're already here, so they are not going back. So people in Nigeria are willing to come out, to leave Nigeria. People outside Nigeria are not willing to go back. So we see a positive direction, one-way direction. They want to stay outside of Nigeria. So what are some unintended positive consequences that we've seen? Number one, improved academic quality. And that is true, which I will talk about in a minute. Number two, increase opportunities for Nigerians outside the country, gain international recognition and improved ranking, increase adaptation of technology, accrue benefits to the Nigerian government and economy. We see adaptation of standardized curriculum and partnership with foreign institutions have led to increased academic quality. We see some partnership that are existing between some of Nigerian universities and their foreign partners. For example, University of Ibadan and University of Pennsylvania, they do exchange of staff and students, and they do collaborative research. And we see University of Benin, number three, they also have some academic and staff exchange. So we have a number of these that have increased over the years, and these have strengthened the quality of academic programs in Nigeria, the quality of research, the quality of teaching, and because of the collaboration and the joint academic and educational activities. We also have some universities sending their students to Nigeria, maybe a study abroad, just one semester or just a full year. And these are strengthened the quality of the academic programs in Nigeria. Opportunities for Nigeria abroad. I mean, based on studies, thousands of Nigerians travel abroad for educational reasons. 71.9% of those surveyed in the United States got their highest degrees outside Nigeria, compared to 28.1% who received the highest degrees in Nigeria. Likewise, 84.6% of those surveyed are already working in the United States. And you see the opportunities created by these for Nigerians. Increased ranking or improved ranking, according to universal ranking by academic performance. When we were writing the book, I stopped at 2020 to 2021 ranking. But as I was looking, I saw that, okay, there's a new release of ranking, that is 2022 to 2023. So we see in 2017, there were 5 universities in Nigeria listed among this list. But today we have at least 10, 11, 12 universities on this list. And so more universities in Nigeria are trying to internationalize so that they can have improved ranking, which is good for their visibility outside here. We see the ranking just for University of Ibadan from 2020, 2021 to 2022, you see it has increased. They were 914, now they are currently 759 position. So we see a lot of improvement with that. Covenant University, that is number 10, is the only private institution that is on this list. And they were 2,616 in 2021, but now they've moved up about close to 400 points. And now they are in 21, 28 position. So increased ranking, we've seen that an improved ranking. Number 5, technology adaptation. I mean, COVID has taught us a lot of things. But before COVID, because of the partnership between the Nigerian institutions and foreign institutions, we've seen a lot of digitization, a lot of the movement towards increased adaptation of technology. All this has been exacerbated by COVID. And so we see a lot of online programs, Google Meet, Zoom Meets, and a lot of things, which has strengthened of the programs in Nigeria and the quality of academic delivery. Economic benefits. This was not included in the book that we presented, but a lot of readings have shown that forex inflow through remittances have increased. I mean, a lot of Nigerians working in outside the country, in diaspora, they continue to remit, send money home. In 2022 alone, Nigerian workers in diaspora remitted over $19 billion back home. That is about 5% of the country's GDP. So you see a lot of support from Nigerians in diaspora. So that has helped the country's economy and also contributed to household incomes in Nigeria. Unintended negative consequences. As we know, brain drain is one of them. Capital flight, gap in quality workforce development, loss of revenue associated with declining enrollment, and lower academic quality, especially when the frame of internationalization is not in place. Some may have wrong partnership. They just want to internationalize. They just Google any university outside Nigeria and they partner with them. So that can also lead to a decline in academic quality. Talking about brain drain, Nigerian students abroad increased by 164% between 2005 and 2015. And we see, so a lot of Nigerians are outside, leaving the country for one reason or the other, mostly education for educational purposes. Nigeria is now one of the 6 largest source countries or sending countries of overseas students. And the resultant effect is brain drain. So it has left a gap in quality of the workforce development in Nigeria. And that is true. In the United States alone, I think most read when it comes to PhD holders. You see a lot of Nigerians. Nigeria, I think, is one of the top countries with citizens that are having PhD degrees in the United States. So this is common, and a lot of brain drain. People that should have helped are leaving Nigeria. I think during the COVID, and I think last year, a lot of medical doctors just left the countries and they went to United Kingdom. Some went to Saudi Arabia. So a lot of people that should have helped develop the countries are living en masse because of internationalization. So continue still on brain drain. 72% of the respondents living in the United States do not plan to return. 84% prefer to work at any university other than Nigeria. And 96.1% of respondents in Nigeria agreed that they will instead work at any foreign institution. The net effect of this is increased outbound mobility. Capital flights. Yeah, we said Nigerians studying abroad. Yeah, that means money is leaving the country. International students in Nigeria, 1,856 international students out of total 1.1. So we see that the international students coming to Nigeria, they are very few compared to thousands of people that are leaving the country. So the comparison between these numbers indicates enormous capital flight from Nigeria. So we are not benefiting from increased enrollment. We are losing students because the net effect is outbound mobility. So Nigeria's unfavorable environment is unlikely to attract international students. How do we mitigate these negative consequences? How can Nigeria reduce the effects of this, the negative effect of internationalization? That has always been the question. How can we attract more international students and generate more income for our educational systems? Number one, addressing the security challenges in the country. It continues to increase, the security challenges. And I remember I was reading the news, and even in some countries in West Africa, where there were coup attempts, military takeover of power, this has exacerbated the situation such that people really want to leave the country. So addressing the security challenges in the various countries, especially Nigeria, will also help mitigate the negative consequences. Number two, Nigeria should invest more in infrastructural development. 3, creating excellent and high-paying jobs. Yes, we can partner with companies, foreign companies, technology companies, so that they can come to Nigeria and just create or just have a representative of their companies in Nigeria, so that students, graduates will prefer to stay in Nigeria rather than leaving the country. Partnership with foreign universities to establish satellite campuses in Nigeria will definitely help. Increase funding for university lecturers and instructors. I think last year there was a 1-year strike, close to 1-year strike. So that has led to a lot of a lot of students left the country because of that. Number 6, Nigeria government should develop a national framework for the internationalization of higher institutions in Nigeria. And these are some of my references. Sorry, I wasn't checking my time if I've gone over the time, which I might. So I'm sorry for that.
It's fine. You did wonderful, and thank you for such a thought-provoking presentation. And I just love that the ideas of unintended consequences are continuing even after the book has been published. So thank you very much. I put in the chat box that if you have questions, please put them in. You could direct them generally, or you could direct them to me, and then we will try to facilitate question and answer, hopefully at the end. So our next speaker is Hakan Ergin, who will be talking about Turkey. Hakan?
Thank you so much, Rosalind. I'm trying to share my screen.
There it goes.
Okay, you see the screen, right?
We see the screen, but we don't see you.
Just a second. Okay. Now do you?
I see the screen. There it is. There you are.
Okay, perfect. Now,
thank you so much.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you so much, dear colleagues, Rosalind and Sharzad, for this excellent book. I am really honored to be a part of this timely book because, as you also mentioned, this takes a really unique perspective. In general, we talk about the, intended consequences of internationalization, but in this book, we take a quite unique perspective. Well, also thank you so much for the ASHE association staff for organizing this, webinar. Well, in my presentation, I will briefly talk about my chapter, how internationalization of higher education in Turkey, is now facing some unintended consequences. First of all, let me just provide you with an overview of higher education in Turkey. So it is one of the largest higher education systems in the European higher education area. So there are 208 universities. 1/3 is private and 2/3 are public. And there are almost 7 million students in the system. Half of them are in open education, and the others are in regular face-to-face education. And the number of academics is standing at 184,000, and half of these academics are female. Around 51% of them are male, and the rest are female. Well, so Turkey is now 100 years old. It was established 100 years ago in 1923, right after the World War I and some independence wars. Well, one of the issues that the early Republican governors faced was how to, develop country, because most of the workforce either died during the war, or maybe they were wounded, and the factories and agriculture were quite, severely damaged, and the country needed some high tech. And luckily, the early governors of the country were, had some experiences before. Some of them studied in France or some other European countries, and they decided to turn their faces to the Western countries. And they decided to send some citizens of Turkey to these countries to get some master's or doctoral education. And then they decided to, invite them back to Turkey and just employ them at universities or other some high-tech companies or factories to develop country in a short time period. But the problem was the country didn't have enough money, because the country was tired of wars. And as I said, factories or other, all, agricultural fields were, damaged. So in 1923, the government could only send 11 Turkish students to study abroad for master's or doctorate. And then they came back, and of course they served at the government departments or universities, and some of them even became ministers of technology or ministers of agriculture. And of course the government was quite decisive to continue this policy, send Turkish students abroad, and help them get some expertise and then bring them back to Turkey and benefit from their expertise. And so that keep up with the Western technology. But as we see, in the early Republican times, because of the financial situation, the government could only send, just a couple of hundreds of Turkish citizens to study abroad. And by 1970, of course, there were some interruptions during the Second World War. And we see that the government could send over 1,700 Turkish citizens to study abroad. And if we check the final numbers, this 100-year-old government policy to send students abroad still continue. And we see that right now, there are, as I checked the recent numbers, by the end of the last year, there were 2,904 Turkish citizens who are government scholars who study in the United States, Canada, or one of the European countries, and who are pursuing their master's or doctoral degrees. And before they go abroad, they sign a commitment, and they commit that right after their education, they will come back to Turkey. If they do not come back, then they will pay a compensation, which is quite, a lot of money, maybe a couple of hundreds of thousands. So because the government sponsors their all living and expenses, and also, tuition fees, etc., while they pursue their master's and doctoral degrees. So we see that outbound student mobility is one of the dimensions of, internationalization of higher education in Turkey that Turkey has been employing since its establishment 100 years ago. Of course, I can also, summarize attracting international students to Turkey in 3 phases. Well, by the maybe end of the first 2 decades, by maybe 1938, there were some early efforts. So there was the wind of nationalism at that time, just before the, the Second World War, and the governments invited some Turkish people who had some, citizenship of other countries in the neighboring countries like Bulgaria, Romania, to study in Turkey. And the government provided them with some scholarships, and they came to Turkey, and then they came back to their own countries where they used to live, like Romania, Bulgaria, etc. The idea was to, develop diplomatic relations with these neighboring countries, and also develop ties with these people who had Turkish origins, in the past. So there are not reliable, numbers in the literature, but some sources I found, state that by 1938, almost 200 citizens of other countries in the neighboring countries were provided with these government scholarships, and they studied in Turkey, and then they went back to their own countries. And we see some interruptions in the meantime during the Second World War, and some military coup times in the 1960s and 80s. But we see another phase in 1992, right after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Turkey again decided that it should develop its ties with some Turkic countries, which were once a part of the Soviet Union. So Turkey launched a great student project for Turkish or Turkic countries like Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, which were once part of the Soviet Union. And this project lasted for over a decade, and 40,000 students from these countries came to Turkey, and they studied. And the finding statistics show that 1/3 of them, over 10,000, successfully completed their programs, got their degrees, and then went back to their own countries. And then, as a last phase, recently, we see that I was also a part of the Study in Turkey program. we launched over a decade ago study in Turkey program. So this was a modernized version of the government scholarship program. So we established a website in a couple of languages, and we promoted this website study in Turkey. And it was quite easy to follow the navigations, the guidelines on this website. And the universities in Turkey just received some applications from countries abroad, and the government provided these universities with some financial support, and these universities enrolled some international students. So as I maybe mentioned in the very beginning, higher education system in Turkey is governed centrally. So this is why the Council of Higher Education, members of which are, appointed by the government and some other, government-related departments, coordinate all higher education system in Turkey. This is why finance and other governance of everything about internationalization of higher education in Turkey is centrally managed. Well, if we have a look at the change in the number of international students in the last decade, we see that the number of international students is now standing over 300,000. So if we think that, the overall population of the system is, student population is over, 6 million, then we can say that this number is quite, a small one, in such a big system. But we should also see that, maybe say that there is a, steady increase in the number of these students. Well, I can also maybe note that 80,000 of these 300,000 students are refugees from Syria. Right after the conflict in Syria, Turkey started a humanitarian approach for Syrian refugee students, and which means that, almost 1 in every 4 international students in Turkey is a refugee, which is maybe the highest number in the world. Well, of course, Turkey's, policy, internationalization policy was not limited to, attract international students or send Turkish nationals abroad for study abroad, but also Turkey, especially in the early Republican times in the 1920s and 30s, invited some international scholars to Turkey. 2 of them are very well known. One is, John Dewey, who was invited to Turkey in 1924, and the government asked him to stay in Turkey for a couple of months and write a report about the, education system in general. And one of the main insights of his report was that practice and learn by doing was missing in Turkish higher education system. So this is why right after his report, lots of laboratories, learn by doing activities, some practical, activities were, integrated with the, existing curriculum at universities and K-12, degree schools. And in 1932, Malche from Switzerland, he was at that time was an excellent, philosopher of education and scientist. He was also, invited to Turkey, and he was asked to focus on especially Istanbul University, based in Istanbul, which was the only university at that time. He was asked to write a report about how to, reform the university, because the government was not happy with the, the research products, outputs of the university. And most of the university professors were from the Ottoman Empire's time, who had some religious background and did not accept scientific research methodology. So Malche also wrote a report about how to reform and westernize and modernize the university. And right after his report in 1933, most of the academics at that time working for Istanbul University were forced to, get retired. and some others, were employed, and the university was modernized. So I mean that Turkey from the very beginning had really a diverse approach to internationalization by the government. This is a photo from 1930s at Istanbul University. Once I was working for that university. So during the crazy time in Germany, Jewish scholars just applied to, some countries to find some jobs. Some of them went to the United States and some other European countries. And during that time, the Turkish government also opened its doors, universities' doors to Jewish scholars. So this is a group of Jewish scholars working at Istanbul University. Let me give you a number. At that time, in 1930s, the number of all academics working at Istanbul University was around 300, and the number of Jewish scholars was 85, which means that 1 in every 3 academics working at the university was a Jewish scholar who fled Germany. So even today, we can see their names on the walls, or some of the classrooms are given the names of these Jewish scholars, because they taught lots of doctoral students. They established, some departments, and these departments are still, standing even today. So still, we memorize, remember these Jewish scholars every day when we go to Istanbul University. They helped the development of the university in a very well manner. They contributed to the university a lot. Well, so if we have a look at the number of international academics from that time until now, we see again there is a steady increase. Before 1984, there was no, reliable data except the Jewish scholars. So there was some interruption in terms of statistics between that time. So I just included the statistics, the reliable one, since 1984. So we see that there is a steady increase in the number of international academics. Again, maybe the reason behind this increase is that, the application procedure was digitalized. So like study in Turkey, there is another database. So an academic in any other part of the world can apply, and just he or she can be interviewed over Zoom. And then if accepted, he or she can just come and start working here. But I should just, note that, again, over 300 of these 3,000, which is 1 in every 10 of these academics, is from a refugee background. They are also Syrian, and half of these academics don't hold a PhD, and they are mostly from an English-speaking country, and they teach at language departments. So now Turkey is developing some policies to attract scholars with PhD to develop the research output these days. Well, in my chapter, I reviewed some literature from the very beginning, 100 years ago until now, and also I analyzed some policy papers of the government about internationalization, because as I said before, all internationalization activities are, policies are governed by the government from the capital in a centralized way. Well, I came up with 5 negative unintended consequences and 1 positive. Let me just briefly talk about them. Well, one of the negative unintended consequences was quantification of internationalization. Well, in the policy statements and development plans and other internationalization strategy documents of the government, I came up with, in my content analysis, with the statements and some keywords that the government intended to enhance the quality of higher education with the help of internationalization. This is why in 2012, the government established Higher Education Quality Council, and the Quality Council describes its mission as to help higher education system increase its quality through internationalization. However, when I check the recent, institutional internationalization papers and other approaches or statements of the universities, the most frequently used word that I encountered is increase the number of. So universities, because of the pressure by the government, by the Council of Higher Education, or maybe for some other reasons, but especially because of the pressure, universities just try to increase the number of everything. Number of international students, number of international academics, number of international agreements. When I check the websites, analyze the contents of the websites of international departments of universities, I came up with that, the universities signed lots of mutual collaborations, but when I checked how many of them were active, I mean, with how many of the partners they did some collaborative work, I checked that sometimes some universities had 1,000 agreements, mobility agreements, collaboration or other research agreements with international partners, but sometimes almost 90% of them were passive, which means that they just signed the agreement, but they did nothing else. But they still use these numbers in their advertisements and promotion to parents and other, international affairs or their reports to the government. The other thing is, regionalization rather than internationalization. Well, when I check the national papers, some policy papers of the government, I see that for a couple of times in the development plan of the country and some other documents, the government intentionally state that Turkey will be a global hub for international students. However, when I check the current profile of the international students right now, I see that over 80% of international students in Turkey are coming from neighboring countries or some other Turkic countries, which we had either some religious or cultural or maybe some racial, ethnic, ties between each other. However, I see that in the development plans, Turkey intended to, by the end of 2020s, Turkey intended to attract almost equal number of, students from all over the world. However, we see that, although Turkey the government launched, some government scholarship programs, the applications mostly came from the neighboring or other Turkic countries like Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, or some other countries in that region. Well, another issue that maybe the policymakers didn't intend was the uncertain future of refugees. Well, Turkey, I am really proud of this policy. Turkey practiced a really humanitarian policy for refugee students. Right now, the number of refugees is standing at 80,000 at universities in Turkey. And Turkey provided them with, financial aid and exempted them from paying a tuition fee, and also, provided them with free Turkish language programs or English language programs, whatever they want. Well, however, the problem is there is a growing number of demand by these refugee groups to study at a university in Turkey. Well, let me give you some numbers by the United Nations Refugee Commissioner, UNHCR. Well, the number of Syrian refugees in Turkey is now standing around 4 million, and half of them, almost 2 million, are below the age of 18. And now they are studying at primary schools, secondary schools, and high schools. And in the future, in the near future, millions of them will demand for higher education in Turkey. Well, right now, it seems that Turkey will not be able to, with its own resources, will not be able to, sponsor all of their higher education. This is why Turkey just, changed some regulations and accept them as, local students and ask them to, take the university entrance test. And if they can, then they can get into a university. It seems that in the future, they will be behaved like a local student. This is also another problem. So there is an uncertainty about refugees' future in higher education because of the growing numbers and demand. Well, another issue.
I'm going to ask you to try to wrap it up because our session's going to end soon.
Okay, sure. Another issue is brain drain. Well, as I said before, the government launched some scholarship programs to send Turkish nationals to study abroad and come back. And I checked the numbers, almost 1,000 Turkish nationals went abroad, but they didn't come back, which means that the government sponsored their brain drain. And another one is dependence on public funds. When I checked the intention of the government on some policy papers, I saw that the government would like to, generate some funding from international students. And it takes the UK as an example and other English-speaking countries. But I see that, most of international student mobility is funded by the government itself, because the government provides some scholarships and exempt them from tuition fees. So it seems that for now, the mobility is mostly depending on public funds. Of course, there are also some positive ones, especially right after the pandemic. We noticed that we suddenly faced some positive unintended consequences of internationalization. Turkey has a very good infrastructure of digital education. There are over 2 million students, 3 million students in 4 open education universities in Turkey. And I just checked the numbers right after the pandemic. As some of the students do not move to another country, they enrolled in these programs, and the number of international students in these programs, open education programs, has doubled already. And another one is maybe Turkey's good side for international students. Its health system is free or low cost for international students. Right after the pandemic, early surveys among students here, international students, show us that, they choose Turkey because if they experience any pandemic situation or something else serious, health system is free here. This is why maybe Turkey can promote this to attract more international students. Of course, there is a lot to do. So we should revisit the goal of internationalization. It is not for numbers, but for quality. So we should maybe recheck our strategy. And of course, we should also need to cooperate with some other global stakeholders to take care of our growing number of refugee students. And maybe we should also, as a positive side, promote our open education and free or low-cost health coverage more to attract more international students. Please, for deeper, discussion, numbers, statistics, just please revisit our book. Thank you so much.
Thank you, both Hakan and Ayo, for such a wonderful presentation. And thank you all for staying a little bit after. If there are any questions, you can ask, you could put them in the chat, you could write them to me, and you could actually speak because we have about another minute or so left. So any comments that anybody would like to say? We will have the slides and the video from Shahrazad Kamyad that will be sent to everybody who registered, so that you will be able to see her voice as well. Thank you to the presenters, and thank you to ASHE and to the Center for International Higher Education for the opportunity to put on this webinar today. Thank you.
Thank you.